were about rewriting history. So when you talked about the Arab Zionists, and then we were just discussing, and then you ended the lecture. Yeah.
Let me then share my screen, and then we'll get started, inshallah. Is my screen visible or not yet?
Not yet. It's starting, I think.
Okay. If it's clear, we can get started.
It says has started. Okay, yeah, it's clear now.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Thank you very much, Anna, and thanks to everyone for being with us in this meeting. Today we will be discussing the current occupation and the future, and then we will open it up for questions regarding everything that we have discussed so far. So think of your questions from now, then we will have, so I'll speak for hopefully less than an hour, and then we can get started, inshallah, with the questions. Okay, so we talked about how the British have helped in the establishment of the Zionist state, and how that it was a Western project, and even the Jews and the Zionists were actually used as a tool by colonial Zionism, by colonial powers in order to expand their imperialist, colonialist power over the region. And even until today, the ex-prime minister and other Zionist leaders have made it clear that actually they are the outpost of the West in the region, and their existence without the support of the West is not actually possible. And what we're seeing today, even in Ukraine, in a sense, and how the West has failed Ukraine, something similar could also befall this Zionist state. Since 1967, Masjid al-Aqsa has been under occupation, direct occupation of the Zionist state, and they have been Judaizing the city, the holy city, and the whole region in different ways, starting from changing the names, starting from various different actions, to education, to many other issues. It is obvious what the Zionists have done. When many of you in your mind, you might say, why, with all the power they had, with the backing of the West, did they not destroy Masjid al-Aqsa from the beginning, from 1967? Actually, the military chaplain and soon to be the chief rabbi suggested blowing up the Dome of the Rock and Masjid al-Aqsa, and he said that this is a once-in-a-life opportunity. If we do not do it now, we will not be able to do it. And he suggested this to the army generals. The army generals refused to do this. Actually, the army generals were mostly secular, and to them, actually blowing up al-Masjid al-Aqsa would mean that they they would be in a massive problem in that it would mobilize all the Muslim community around the world against them. So they left al-Masjid al-Aqsa, and although they occupied it, they went in with their tanks, they put the Israeli flag over the site of al-Masjid al-Aqsa. Moshe Dayan, their chief general, entered the area, and they thought, what can we do? And the best choice was to leave it in the hands of the Muslims. So to leave the area of the Masjid al-Aqsa in the hands of the Muslims. They took Al-Buraq wall, and it was the chief rabbinate of Israel made a fatwa saying that no Jew is no Jew is allowed to enter the site of the Masjid al-Aqsa because it is too holy. And this is what you see here in front of you is actually a sign that is put up above the gate where the Jews enter from into al-Masjid al-Aqsa. And it says clearly that according to the Torah, it is forbidden to enter the area of the Temple Mount during to its sacredness, what they call the area of the Masjid al-Aqsa, they call it Temple Mount. And here, Moshe Dayan sitting with the Awqaf personnel who were associated with Jordan, saying that they would leave the administration of the inside of the area to Muslims. However, the external control will be to the Zionist state, plus Jews and tourists will be able to enter the area as visitors, but they are not allowed to pray inside the area of al-Masjid al-Aqsa. We talked about the destruction of the Mavari quarter, the North African quarter, which was destroyed immediately after they took al-Buraq wall, with its houses, with its madrasas, with its schools, with everything. It was destroyed. This is what it looked like before, and all these historical monuments were completely razed to the ground. And according to international law, this wall and the pathway in front of it and the whole of the quarter is actually a Waqf property, and it only belongs to the Muslims, as we said in the report that we mentioned that was approved by the League of Nations in 1931. This is what al-Buraq wall looked like after the destruction of the Maghrib quarter and removing it completely. Inside al-Masjid al-Aqsa, there was a few different attacks attempting to destroy al-Masjid al-Aqsa. The first one was the burning of al-Masjid al-Aqsa in 1969. In 1969, Zionist, not a Jewish Zionist, but a Christian Zionist, based on a prophecy by a Christian priest in the United States that he said the return of the Messiah will be in 4 years after Israel had taken the Eastern Jerusalem. So Michael Dennis Rohan, he came and with the help of Jewish Zionists attempted to burn down al-Masjid al-Aqsa. In 1968, there was an attempt, but it did not succeed. In 1969, they succeeded in burning the southern building of al-Masjid al-Aqsa, and it caused a lot of damage to it. The dome was damaged, the minbar of Salah ad-Din, actually the minbar of Nuruddin that was brought by Salah ad-Din was damaged heavily, and Israeli authorities restricted the coming of the fire engines to put out the fire. And from the city, from the holy city, and the firefighters came from Hebron, which is south of Jerusalem, about 30 kilometers. They were able to reach the city and try to put out the fire well before the fire engines were able to reach from the city within the actual city. This caused a big outcry across the whole of the Muslim world, and the establishment of OIC, the Organization of the Islamic Conference, was set up as a response to unite the Muslims over this issue. However, no real action was taken by these states against the Zionist state. It was the reason why OIC was set up. And today, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, actually until today, it stands on Al-Aqsa, which it was set up for, has become a side issue. And the committee that is involved in this matter has not even met in 20 years or even further. Underneath the Masjid al-Aqsa from 1967, tunnels have been dug underneath the Masjid al-Aqsa, and some of this digging was said to find remnants of the Jewish temple. From 1967 until today, no remnants of any Jewish temple were found in these tunnels. The tunnels took a second trajectory, which is to weaken the foundation of al-Masjid al-Aqsa, which it has. And we see cracks in the walls. We see some parts of al-Masjid al-Aqsa falling apart. Some of the water wells underneath the al-Masjid al-Aqsa also have been affected. Some trees have been, because the roots have been weakened due to the tunnels and the chemicals that they have been using. It has caused a lot of problems to the structure of the Masjid al-Aqsa. And it is expected that there is a major earthquake that will hit the whole region. And this earthquake, a tiny earthquake, would be able to bring down the structure of the Masjid al-Aqsa. In 1990, there was many different attacks, but I'm mentioning the main ones. In 1990, Temple Mount, or what they call temple organizations, wanted to bring down al-Masjid al-Aqsa by putting the cornerstone for the temple. And this sparked a lot of tension. And then Israeli soldiers and army entered the Masjid al-Aqsa and attacked. It was al-Aqsa massacre in October 1990, which tens of Palestinians were killed inside the Masjid al-Aqsa. And if this was to happen anywhere else in the world, an attack in a holy place on Muslims while they are worshipping, if this was to happen in a synagogue or a church, this would be condemned across the world. This massacre took place inside the Masjid al-Aqsa and had not stopped. What I mean had not stopped, that similar in 2017 and earlier in 2000, when Ariel Sharon entered the Masjid al-Aqsa, tens were shot inside al-Masjid al-Aqsa. From that time, from the time of the occupation, the idea of legalizing prayer, Jewish prayer inside the Masjid al-Aqsa had been put forward, but the temple groups were not very strong. They were on the fringe of Israeli society. Today, they have representatives in the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, and they are pushing this idea forward, as we will see. This is when Ariel Sharon, who was the opposition leader in 2000, entered the area of the Masjid al-Aqsa, and this sparked the second Intifada. You can see the Muslims inside the Masjid al-Aqsa trying to resist the soldiers coming in with their guns, with blazing guns coming inside the Masjid al-Aqsa, and to try to stop them with their bodies and with stones and with chairs and their shoes. And the Israeli army and police did not stop from shooting people directly in the head, in the legs, in the chest, inside al-Masjid al-Aqsa. And these are real pictures of people who got shot inside al-Masjid al-Aqsa. The other issue that I would like to talk about is what is regarded as the division of the Masjid al-Aqsa. A similar massacre happened inside the Masjid al-Ibrahim in Al-Khalil, the Ibrahim Mosque in Hebron. A massacre took place in 1994. A Jewish individual, Zionist, a rabbi and a doctor, he came in during the month of Ramadan while the Muslims were in Salah in prayer, in the morning prayer. And as they were in sujood, they were massacred in the prayer, and tens were killed during this process. What happened afterwards is important for us, is that Israel sealed off and closed off the mosque for 6 months. And when it reopened the mosque, it reopened it with 60% of the mosque being turned into a Jewish synagogue, and only 40% is left for the Muslims. From that day on, hundreds of times adhan is not allowed in the mosque. And one Israeli Knesset member of the parliament, suggested that something similar needs to be done in the Masjid al-Aqsa, that we need to divide the Masjid al-Aqsa both in terms of temporal division and also split up the mosque. So Jews will have a section of the mosque besides what they have taken already, which is al-Buraq wall. So from especially over the last 20 years, after the second Intifada and the attack on Masjid al-Aqsa, from that time on, Muslims were restricted in entering Masjid al-Aqsa and harassed at the gates. Their IDs are confiscated. They decide who enters and who does not enter. Sometimes they set an age limit. Only people over the age of 50 can enter the mosque. After that, they started allowing Zionist, Jewish extremists access to the mosque on a daily basis under the protection of the Israeli police and the Israeli military. And the mosque today is divided in terms of a temporal division, which is the morning from 7:30 till Dhuhr prayer. Access is given to Jews and to tourists to enter the area of Masjid al-Aqsa. And in the afternoon, after the Dhuhr prayer, for another couple of hours. And this you saw actually a few days ago on Thursday, for the first time, Jewish extremists are entering Masjid al-Aqsa with the clothings of the priests and the rabbis who will be conducting service inside what they call the temple. So part of their larger plan is to eventually build a temple on the site of the Masjid al-Aqsa. But to do this, they have taken various steps, continuous steps to do this. The first one is to divide the Masjid al-Aqsa in terms of time slots. And the second now is to move towards allocating section of Masjid al-Aqsa for Jewish prayer. These pictures you can see in this image here in front of you. Zionist soldier is attacking Muslim women at the gates of Masjid al-Aqsa, and you can see the fear in their faces. This has become a normal endeavor. This image, Israeli police pulls off the hijab of Muslim women just outside the gate of Masjid al-Aqsa. Muslims are barricaded outside the mosque, while the Zionists use another gate to enter inside the Masjid al-Aqsa. And you can see they started with, they were not allowed to conduct prayer. Then it moved towards silent prayer. And the last few weeks, it has turned into not just silent prayer. They are making public prayers inside Masjid al-Aqsa. They are reading from the Torah. They're making loud prayers. And they are even making what they call the sujood, the Jewish sujood, which is different from the Muslim sujood. Not a single day goes past without Zionist soldiers and army and police entering Masjid al-Aqsa. There is not a single day. Earlier, when the Muslims were present inside the mosque, they will go around and they will keep saying their only weapon was takbir, to say Allahu Akbar, to try to stop the soldiers from progressing and the extremists. However, they all have been banned from entering al-Masjid al-Aqsa. Israel made what they call a blacklist. So when you reach al-Masjid al-Aqsa and you are coming, they know the names of the people who are making takbir, because they have cameras across the mosque and from outside the mosque. And they started banning Muslims, giving them court orders not to be allowed into al-Masjid al-Aqsa for 6 months, for 3 months, for 1 year. And many sisters like Khadija Khuwais, Hanad al-Halawani are banned from entering the Masjid al-Aqsa, and they come to the closest point of the mosque. Also, in this picture, you see a sister, a Muslim sister, her name is Aida. She also used to go around, she's holding the Quran, and she's making takbir that this mosque is ours. You can see they're not allowed inside the mosque, and they used to pray their prayers outside. And in the cold, many of them had got sick because of just waiting outside the gates of the masjid. You can see here they're praying outside, and here the Zionists and the Jewish extremists are entering, clapping, and are happy that they are entering inside al-Masjid al-Aqsa. In different occasions, when Muslims are confronting these incursions inside the Masjid al-Aqsa, Israeli border police and army comes in with their blazing guns, and they shoot at the worshippers. They shoot tear gas, sound bombs, rubber bullets, and also live ammunition are shot inside al-Masjid al-Aqsa. There's a story that I witnessed with my eyes 7 or 8 years ago, and a group of sisters were sitting studying the Quran, reading the Quran, and an Israeli soldier comes and insults them and swears at them and asks them to leave the mosque. They refuse, and a young girl, 16-year-old, she responds back to him, and he attacks her. And I saw this with my own eyes, and it was very, very painful. And Al-Aqsa, I was about 100 meters away, and when I saw this, I ran towards them to help. But what the soldier did is he pushed her on the ground, and he bit her with his own teeth, like a vicious dog. And an elderly sister was trying to help her, so he pushed her, and she broke her arm when she fell to the ground. We got there, and 10 tens of soldiers behind him started beating everyone, and then they came in with large numbers, as with Sharon's visit, and they started firing at the people inside al-Masjid al-Aqsa. You can see the one particular attack was on women, because the women were the ones, most of the men were either arrested or not allowed to enter the mosque. So the women took this opportunity to be there and present inside al-Masjid al-Aqsa. And you can see here, actually, many of the sisters here are very active in coming to stop the occupiers from being inside al-Masjid al-Aqsa. And many of them got arrested. They're very difficult positions. You can see the attacks on different buildings. What they would do is that they would barricade people inside the buildings of the Masjid al-Aqsa to allow Jewish worshippers or extremists inside the Masjid al-Aqsa. This you can see in this image. This is just at the gate of the Masjid al-Aqsa. Nearly, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 soldiers trying to arrest and to take down one single woman just at the gate of al-Masjid al-Aqsa. And you can see how hard they're pulling her, and she was arrested for some time. Not only Muslim holy sites, but also Christian holy sites have been attacked and graffiti on their walls. The holiest church to Christianity, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, was also closed off actually not too long ago, just before the corona outbreak. So the Zionist occupation does not even allow Palestinians from Gaza to come on, Christian Palestinians to come and to have their services in their holiest churches, the same to what they have done to the Muslims. We talked about the mosque of the Ibrahim Mosque, and you see this is the Ibrahim Mosque that has been split into 60% for Jews and 40% for Muslims. And these are pictures from the massacre that took place and the what took place in that mosque. When we talk about the spatial division of al-Masjid al-Aqsa, there has been many different suggestions. One of them was to take part of al-Masjid al-Aqsa, which is the Marwanid area, the basement, which is a very large area. And the Muslims, when they were aware of this, immediately they took action and reopened it for prayer. Another place that they wanted to take, and this is a map that is being suggested by Zionist extremists, that this red area would be solely for the Jews, and then to extend the area, the green area around it, to extend this for Jewish prayer and practices, and to take over the Gate of Rahmah, which instigated Muslims to, the Zionists have closed the Gate of Rahmah, which is a building that used to be used as a place of prayer and a madrasa from the time of Imam al-Ghazali. They closed it off for 19 years. And when the Muslims knew of this plan, they broke the lock that was placed by the Zionists and went in and started to use it as a place of prayer. Not only the living are being persecuted, but also the dead have not got away. Lots of graffiti on Muslim graves, graves of the Sahaba, graves of the Mujahideen at the time of Salah ad-Din. The graveyard or the cemetery of Ma'manullah was, much of the graves were actually taken out. And not only this, on the site of this cemetery and this graveyard, which is one of the most important cemeteries in the Old City, just outside the Old City, a museum of tolerance was to be built. And this is where they were pushing the idea forward. The Rahmah cemetery, which is next to Masjid al-Aqsa, the eastern wall of the Masjid al-Aqsa, which houses two graves of two great companions of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Ubadah ibn Samit and Shaddad ibn Aus. This was to be turned, part of it was to be turned as parks for Zionists. We talked about in our last class about rewriting history and the idea of how Zionism is trying to, or Zionists are trying to sell their narrative on Al-Aqsa and on Palestine and on Jerusalem, and where they are taking this idea forward. Now, talking about the future, what Jews are envisaging is that over the site of the Masjid al-Aqsa, a Jewish temple needs to be built, and it must be built. And this seems to be a consensus amongst all the Jews. However, how is it to be done is questionable. Some suggest that it should be done through divine intervention, that God would bring this down from the heavens, and it would be over the site of the Masjid al-Aqsa. And most of the Jews are actually on this position. However, some of them say we need to take action, and we are the ones that need to reconstruct the temple, and the temple organizations have different plans for this, and they have prepared nearly everything for the rebuilding of what they call a Jewish temple over the site of the Masjid al-Aqsa, starting from the stones, the foundation stones, we talked about it, but also other stones, as well as the attire that the priests that will be wearing, the sermons that they will be reading, what is needed for the temple, and even training the priest who will be conducting the services inside the temple. I mentioned to you the cracks in the walls of the Masjid al-Aqsa, and you can see it clear here in the southern wall, also in the eastern wall, based on the tunnels that were exposed by Sheikh Ra'ad Salah in the early 90s. Al-Aqsa being under occupation it brings shame to the Muslim Ummah. Not just that, according to international law, this is occupied territories, occupied land, and Israel has no right to change anything within the city. This is international law, but Israel has been belligerent towards international law and has not taken any of it seriously, because everything is also vetoed by the United States. The United States vetoes the decisions taken against Israel by the world. And this is a place so holy, full of soldiers with guns, attacking believers, attacking worshippers in their holiest site, is something that is not acceptable whatsoever. In 2017, 3 young Palestinians from inside with Israeli citizenship, out of all this frustration, attacked Israeli soldiers at the gates of al-Masjid al-Aqsa, and they were shot dead inside al-Masjid al-Aqsa. And immediately after that, Israel sealed al-Masjid al-Aqsa and closed it off. And al-Aqsa was closed for 2 weeks. And Israel placed these metal detectors at the gates of al-Masjid al-Aqsa, and they placed cameras at the gates to see everything, and they set up everything within a very short period of time. And they said you can only enter the mosque through these new, with these new changes. Palestinians and the Jerusalemites stood there outside these gates, conducted their prayers for 2 full weeks, and they refused, and the numbers kept growing until Israel, seeing tens of thousands coming and gathering just outside the gates of al-Masjid al-Aqsa and saying they will not enter until these barriers are removed. Israel, with a lot of pressure, removed them, although it closed al-Masjid al-Aqsa for 2 weeks, but this was a victory to the Palestinians in that area. Where are we moving forward with this issue since the announcement of Donald Trump that Jerusalem will be the eternal capital, not just of Israel, but the eternal capital of the Jewish people? The announcement and the move of the American embassy to Eastern Jerusalem, or to Jerusalem itself, is something that the whole world condemned. However, Donald Trump did this, and he did move the embassy to Jerusalem, and the announcement of the deal of the century. The deal of the century, or Donald Trump's deal, actually it was prepared by his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and you can see also on the right-hand side who is also Jared Kushner is a Jew and a Zionist, and in the other image you see with Netanyahu is David Friedman, who is also a Jewish Zionist. He is the ambassador to the Zionist state, and the deal of the century is extremely dangerous in regards to al-Masjid al-Aqsa. Although there's a lot within this so-called deal of the century, however, I would like to concentrate on what it envisages the situation for al-Masjid al-Aqsa. This is how it envisages a future Palestinian state made of many islands, many states, many city-states that will be connected through routes, and you will have bridges or tunnels to connect Palestinian areas from one place to another. Not only that, to connect Gaza, which goes through Israeli occupied territories, to connect it to the West Bank through a tunnel that will be dug across maybe 40 or 50 kilometers. So Palestinians will be traveling through this route only. So this is how it saw it, the ideas of security, and the refugees are not allowed to return back. But the interesting part is over the issue of al-Masjid al-Aqsa for us here. And it sees that al-Masjid al-Aqsa, besides everything that has been lost from the land of Palestine, al-Masjid al-Aqsa should be shared by Muslims, Jews, and Christians. The Christians really do not have an interest in the area of al-Masjid al-Aqsa. However, Jews would like to enter the area of al-Masjid al-Aqsa, as we have shown. What it is suggesting in the deal of the century is that the Jews should be allowed on their holidays. The site of the Masjid al-Aqsa should be for the Jews during Jewish holidays and for Muslims during Muslim holidays. So it is moving beyond just the division by hour into division by days. So when it is a Jewish holiday, then the only Jews will be allowed access inside al-Masjid al-Aqsa. And it suggests, there's a full paper on this I've written, you can read it, published in Inside Turkey. It talks about the future of the Masjid al-Aqsa as part of the deal of the century. So this is what it is suggesting. Also, the capital of the Palestinian state will be outside Jerusalem. And it says something really bizarre. It suggests that one of the villages outside Jerusalem can be renamed as Al-Quds, so that it will be the capital of the Palestinians, or any other place they wish to rename as Al-Quds. So taking the name Al-Quds from the holy city and saying you can name anywhere you want as Al-Quds, but this will always be Israeli territory, which goes against international law, with the exception of the United States. The whole world sees this place as occupied territory. What you see here is how the Muslims reopened the area of the Rahma Gate, which was closed for 19 years. They broke down the barrier that the Israelis put up and the lock, and then they re-established it as part of al-Masjid al-Aqsa. What is expected, what happened last Ramadan with the attack on al-Masjid al-Aqsa on the 28th of Ramadan, to allow for Jews to enter al-Masjid al-Aqsa during the holiest month and the holiest days to Muslims. This is expected to be repeated inside al-Masjid al-Aqsa this coming Ramadan, as in the last Ramadan, and what happened and the attack that took place against the Muslims at the gates of al-Masjid al-Aqsa were very bloody, and you're all aware of what took place. What is expected this coming Ramadan is much worse. During last Ramadan, it was one single Jewish holiday, Israeli holiday. This year, it will be 5 different holidays in the month of Ramadan that will come all at the same time. We'll stop here and then take your questions, and then finish with the future. What is the future based on political science and based on the Muslim narrative and based on Christian and other narratives. So back to you, Amna. How shall we take the questions?
I think we can accept if anyone wants to like open their video and talk in the audio.
It will be much better if everyone opens their videos. So you've been seeing me for the last 10 lessons. It would be good to see your blessed faces in this final session. So Amna, go ahead. Who would like to ask?
Yeah, so we will accept any form of questions either throughout the chat or if anyone wants to say anything. Let me check the chat if anyone sent anything. Okay, so we have one question in the chat from Rumaisa. She's saying that she's a law school graduate and she's struggling with the Zionist in the legal field as well. But she doesn't know what to do from Turkey or another countries and who to contact. Can you guide us through this? For example, can we subject the foundation lands remaining from the Ottoman Empire, which was occupied in Palestine, for international proceedings?
Okay. Actually in Turkey, there's an author, he's written on this, but even internationally, the author, his name is Berdal Aral. He looks at the issue of Palestine from international law. Unfortunately, international law only accepts that the West Bank and Gaza and Eastern Jerusalem to be occupied territories. 80% of Palestine is the Israeli state. So this is a problem that we have, that according to international law, that we're only talking about 20% of Palestine. The rest of it is not recognized as Palestine, it's recognized as Israel. The work that needs to be done, actually taking Israel to the International Criminal Court for its, you can only do this over what has been taking place only in the West Bank and Gaza. But this also needs to be done. And there are, when we look at from the Ottoman period, most of, not just Palestine, the rest of the region was occupied from the Ottomans, and the colonialist powers then transferred them into these nation states like Jordan and Syria and Lebanon and other countries, and including the Zionist state of Israel. So from a legal point of view, you will be only working on what they call the occupied territories, which is only 20% of what Palestine is. And this is why the resistance do not accept this. However, the Palestinian Authority, or Mahmoud Abbas and his clique, they only want Palestine inside this 20%. And even inside this 20%, Israel does not really accept. So Israel does not want a sovereign state. Israel has made this actually very clear. And in the deal of the century, Israel wants a demilitarized Palestinian state that will be under the sovereignty of Israel. So it will not be a fully sovereign country. Today, the Palestinian president, Mahmoud Abbas, who calls himself a president, cannot travel from one city to another city without seeking a written permission from the Israelis. So today there is nothing, although it is recognized that there is a state of Palestine, with the exception of few countries, including the United States, this state does not really exist on the ground. There is no Palestine per se. All of Palestine is under occupation. And you see this even in the areas that are controlled by the Palestinian Authority. Israel can come in as it pleases and do whatever it wishes. And you saw this in Jenin, in Hebron, in Nablus. They would go in, kill Palestinians, and leave with the permission, the green light from the Palestinian president and the Palestinian Authority. So in a sense, it's this is what we're dealing with. So coming back to the legal position, this is something that needs to be taken on. Unfortunately, the Palestinian Authority has many times said that it would do this, but it has not been able to implement it because Israel threatens them. If you take us to the International Criminal Court, we will cut off all the aid. We will cut off any exterior funding. So this would mean that the Palestinian Authority will be dysfunctional. So it retracts its position from taking Israel to these international courts, unfortunately. Back to you, Anna. I hope that answers the question, if I understood it well.
Yeah, I think it was really informative. We have another question. What can be done to appoint a new Palestinian leadership? How can Israeli be brought to justice under international law? So it's in the similar manner regarding international law.
Yes.
Yeah.
A good question. Today we're talking about democracy and election and how we should move things forward. How long has it been since the last Palestinian election? It's been over a decade, where actually Mahmoud Abbas has no legitimacy because his term has ended long time ago. And the last Palestinian election brought Hamas into the question. And when Hamas won the election, the whole world, so the world which says we need democracy, when the wrong people are elected, then what takes place? The whole world besieged, didn't accept the Palestinian decision, and Israel said they will never accept Hamas as the legitimate Palestinian Authority, and Hamas was besieged in Gaza, and the blockade was placed on Gaza from, it's been now nearly 14 or 15 years since this took place. So although you are playing by you're playing by the book, by their game, it was not accepted. And this was completely rejected, unfortunately. And you saw even Britain recently announced Hamas as a terrorist organization, although its political wing is generally accepted worldwide on this regard, but the UK with the Zionist lobby has actually took this forward. So we come to how do you appoint a Palestinian leadership? There is no way you can have an election under the current status. Actually, there was suggestion to have election, and Mahmoud Abbas and the Palestinian Authority said, we will not have an election without Jerusalem. Israel said you cannot have elections in Jerusalem. However, the United Nations and the European Union said they will facilitate the election even in Jerusalem amongst the Palestinians, so a new Palestinian Authority would be appointed. However, Israel advised Mahmoud Abbas that if an election takes place, Mahmoud Abbas and his ministers will all be thrown out. they will have no chance of winning this election. And again, this election will be won by the resistance in Gaza and the other Palestinian parties who are opposing Israel. They would win the election. So Mahmoud Abbas called off the election. So he canceled the election that were meant to take place last year. And it does not seem, because the European Union actually keeps pushing this idea forward, that they will not do anything until an election actually takes place. However, this election is not in favor of Israel, nor for Mahmoud Abbas and his party, because they will be they would lose this election if this is to take place. So this is the first part of what can be done to appoint a new Palestinian leadership. Actually, Palestinians outside Palestine have tried to set up, because actually most of Palestinians are actually outside Palestine. They've set up a Palestinians Abroad forum, and they have made election, and they have chosen a leader for the Palestinians outside Palestine in order to put pressure on the Palestinian Authority on this issue. However, Mahmoud Abbas is not willing to call for an election anytime soon. And actually, the best option is to completely take out the Palestinian leadership out of their position. And even Mahmoud Abbas threatened that he would dissolve the Palestinian Authority, and Israel would have to deal with the whole of Palestine as an occupying power. Since 1994, when the peace process started, Yasser Arafat was brought in to govern the Palestinians. And this turned into policing Palestinians on behalf of Israel. You are giving Israel a 5-star occupation. Israel does not have to deal with arresting Palestinians. The Palestinian Authority can do that on their behalf. Israel does not need to stop the resistance in the West Bank. The Palestinian Authority will do it on its behalf. So you've come to a place where actually having the Palestinian Authority is a burden on the Palestinians. If the Palestinian Authority is dissolved, as actually Mahmoud Abbas suggested a few times, Israel would have to take control over the West Bank, which is already, it has control over it in a way or another, but it has to put up to look after the population as the occupying authority. So it would be the Israelis that would have to provide the water, the electricity, and deal with all things relating to the people that are being occupied. And maybe this is the best way forward, but dissolving the Palestinian Authority might be the best option in terms of moving forward in this regard. Choosing Palestinian leadership seems to be quite difficult at the moment. How can Israel be brought to justice under international law? This also needs to go through various courts, and with the current Palestinian Authority, they're not willing to take any steps forward. How can this be done in a different way? If there are agreement on a representative of Palestinians outside, maybe they will be able to internationally recognize, maybe they will be able to take Israel to court on this issue. But this seems to be a lot of people's hands are tied in this issue. Many Muslim countries can actually maybe come together and do something on this issue. However, the other problem on this regard is the Muslim countries are not united over the issue of al-Aqsa and on the issue of Palestine. You saw many of them are actually normalizing relationship with Israel and taking this into another dimension. They are whether United Arab Emirates or Bahrain or Morocco or Sudan or even Turkey. Unfortunately, on this, the idea of normalizing relation with Israel, it is very problematic, and it is very harmful to the Palestinian cause. And even this is the stance of the Palestinian Authority, that normalizing relationship with Israel does not help the Palestinians. It makes it much worse for them in the national and international arena. Sorry, Noura, I extend the answers so I do not miss anything out. I hope I've also answered that question.
Yes,
really,
that was really, really informative and inclusive of everything.
It's really nice to see so many blessed faces from across the world. Thank you all for opening, those who opened your cameras. It's good to see your faces also.
Yes. We have another question from Ibrahim. He opened his camera here, so yeah, I'm gonna just, you can ask it live if you want, or I can read it out.
Ibrahim, it's good to see you. We've been in contact, but this is the first time I see your blessed face, so go ahead.
Jazakallah khairan, Doctor. It's an honor, and many people have benefited from the series, alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah.
And will continue to benefit, inshallah. Doctor, just a quick question. Many times in the outreach that is done, people ask the question about the reasons, the rationale behind the excavations beneath Masjid al-Aqsa. And I just get the feeling that people are obsessed by some theories that they come across on the internet, such as, you know, whether the Israelis are searching for the Ark of the Covenant to control the world or whatever it is, or, you know, the scrolls of Harut and Marut and so forth. So I just wanted to get an answer from you as to what is exactly the Israeli rationale. How would you respond to these kind of theories? And also the broader idea that I get that people might be looking for some deeper conspiracies when I feel the conspiracies are quite apparent.
Yes. Thank you very much, Ibrahim, for this good question. Actually, what we need to understand is how Israeli society is made up. Not everyone within Israeli society is religious. Actually, most of the Zionist leaders are secular. And most of the people who were doing the excavations and the archaeologists are actually secular Israeli archaeologists. They do not believe in the existence even of God. However, what they were from 1967, excavation started under southern of the Masjid al-Aqsa and underneath the Masjid al-Aqsa for the purpose of finding Jewish remains, because the Jewish narrative is that this is the place of the first and second temple. This is the Temple of Solomon. This is in order to try to prove whether there was anything of this. The results given by the Israeli archaeologists and their leader, particularly, and the chief archaeologist, Ben Dov, he said that everything that they managed to see was Islamic and Byzantine remains. They have not been able to find anything Jewish from the exhibitions that they have done. It even goes further on this issue, particularly in the south of Masjid al-Aqsa, where they were actively looking to find remains. All of what was exposed was Umayyad palaces. So in terms of archaeology, and this is in terms of it as a secular science, the results that were published showed this. One Israeli archaeologist talks about the myth of the temple, that there was never a temple of Solomon, and whole of this is a myth. And he goes even further to say that if you ask 100 archaeologists on the site of the temple, you will get 101 answers. You will not get 100 answers, you will get 101 answers. There is no consensus, there is no agreement. Some religious Jews claim that the site of the temple is not even in Jerusalem. It is in Nablus. Some others claim it to be somewhere else. Some even biblical archaeologists suggest it to be over the city of Silwan, not over the site of al-Masjid al-Aqsa. However, what changed in the last 20 years is that most of the archaeology done over the last 20 years is promoted by right-wing groups, and the funding comes from Christian Zionists in the United States. And this has changed the direction towards this. So in the excavations that they are doing south of al-Masjid al-Aqsa, every time they find something, they would rename it. So it is from the Iron Age, but they would not say it's just from the Iron Age. This is from the time of David, they will claim. And they will rename the stone or rename the part that they found to be the stone of David or Solomon or something in order to give it that biblical context. The digging underneath the Masjid al-Aqsa has two elements. The first is to find Jewish remnants, which they have not found since 1967. So they've been digging for all these years. Nothing was found except for Islamic and Roman. The earliest is Roman remnants and some even Greek, but nothing that dates back to the time of Sulaiman alayhi salam. The second part is to weaken the foundation of al-Masjid al-Aqsa. The weakening of the foundation, they have succeeded, and we have covered. The idea of the conspiracies that Brother Ibrahim mentioned, as he has made a very good point, what they are doing is clear to the eye. And we don't need to go beyond that and to go into conspiracies that are very difficult to prove. The Ark of the Covenant is a very controversial issue to Jews. They do not know where the Ark of the Covenant is. Is it in Ethiopia, as some of them suggest? Is it in there? There is so many, and most likely it was taken from earth. It doesn't exist on earth, as the Quran actually mentions that the angels brought it down when the Jews refused the leadership of Talut. The Ark of Covenant was brought, Tabut Sakina, was brought by the angels to prove the kingdom of the kingship of Talut, as in Surah Al-Baqarah. However, it was brought down, it would have been also lifted up. And the scrolls of Harut and Marut and magic and so on, all of this, there's not much that we can talk about, because all of it is, there is lots of question marks, on this, whether they actually even exist in the form of scrolls, or it was just knowledge that they were teaching, as the Quran talks about. So without going into what we have solid plans that they would like to do in the site of al-Masjid al-Aqsa, and that is enough for us to be able to work to derail these plans of the destruction of al-Masjid al-Aqsa based on what they are talking about and what they are publishing, without going beyond that to other conspiracies. I hope that answers the question, inshallah, Ibrahim. Thank you. Amna?
Yes. We have a question about the courses in the universities in Turkey, Malaysia, and Scotland.
Yes. So
it's a bit away from the lecture kind of questions, but we can address it shortly, I guess.
Okay. The field of Islamic Jerusalem studies was developed as a new field of inquiry in Scottish universities, particularly the University of Aberdeen. An institute and a center for Islamic Jerusalem studies was set up in the early 2000s, and it graduated quite a number of experts in this field during that 15 years that it functioned. Unfortunately, it came to an end due to various other problems. However, the field of inquiry was presented to Muslim universities, and the university UUM, University Utara, Malaysia, in northern Malaysia, established a Center for Excellence for Islamic Jerusalem Studies, and it gives masters by research, MPhil, and PhD on the topic. Recently in Turkey, at the University of Social Sciences, University of Ankara, which you will receive the certificate of this course from this institution, set up a center for these studies, and also a master's program in English language in the University, Social Sciences University of Ankara. So this teaches, gives master degree, taught master with thesis at the university here in the Turkish capital, where I'm giving you these lectures actually from. The second university in Turkey that opened up masters in Bayt al-Maqdis studies is the University of Mardin in the southeast of Turkey, but it does the program in Arabic and in Turkish. So the program is available in Arabic and in Turkish at the University of Mardin, in English at the University of Social Sciences University of Ankara, and in English and Arabic by research and Malay at the University of UUM in Malaysia. So in terms of postgraduate studies, these are the only institutions that do this. And the importance of these studies is they are essential to create an academic narrative, an academic Muslim narrative on the issue of Bayt al-Maqdis. Zionists have been dominating academia with their narrative since the creation of the Zionist state. And this is confronting academically this work. This is together with an international refereed journal, the Journal of Islamic Jerusalem Studies, which you have read some of the articles of for this classes. Also, an international academic conference from 1997. The 22nd Academic International Conference will take place in Ankara in October 2020, and it will be looking at the future of Islamic Jerusalem in terms of academic scholarship, where we started, where we got to, the position of Zionist scholarship and Orientalist scholarship, and where we need to move forward in terms of academia and academic scholarship. I answered more than the question, Nora.
Thank you, Dr. Khalid. There is a question from Ayman. She said, what were the interests of UK and what are the interests of USA to support Israel? Which is a very broad question.
Yes.
But maybe we can give points.
Okay. Just over in 2 or 3 minutes. Actually, the creation of the State of Israel, and we did a whole session on this, the creation of the State of Israel is actually a Western colonial project. This idea of creating a Jewish state in Palestine was not first suggested by Jews. It was first actually suggested by Napoleon in 1799. And then the British took this project forward, particularly with Christian Zionism. They are pushing for the creation of a Jewish state and taking the Jews back to Palestine and making Jerusalem its capital, and the rebuilding of a Jewish temple over the site of the Masjid al-Aqsa. All of this is part of the apocalyptic beliefs of Christians that for the second coming of the Messiah, first we need to achieve all of this before the Messiah actually comes down. So this is a religious interest, which was the driving force for the creation of the state, but also there are political, economic, and other interests. And we saw actually many of the those who were asking for the British to control the region and to create a Jewish state were actually doing it. Some of them were doing it for Christian religious reasons, and others were doing it for the control of the Eastern Muslim countries and for colonization and imperialism. And today, Israel does succeed in doing this. In the position of Israel actually has achieved the division of this. And you know how strong the Zionist lobby is in both the United States and in the UK. Besides this, actually, a lot of Jews were against Zionism, and particularly in the early period until the 1930s. Most Jews were actually against the concept of Zionism. And even today, there are groups like Netori Karta who are against Zionism and pray every day for the dismantling, peaceful dismantlement of the Zionist state. However, the other side is, we mentioned this also, that many Jews saw the creation and the moving of Jews to Palestine as anti-Semitic. The only Jewish minister in the cabinet, when Balfour issued his declaration, we shared the document that includes his quotation. He clearly talked about the Balfour Declaration is anti-Semitic. You just want to get rid of the Jews, the Jewish problem in Europe, and export it somewhere else, like at the time of the Crusades, exporting a problem to the Holy Land was the solution to many problems in Europe. However, as we mentioned, Israel does faithfully represent the interest of the West in the region and has been doing so, and Netanyahu has repeated that they are doing so. Finally, I would like to quote Joe Biden, who said, if there was not an Israel in the region, America would have to create an Israel for its own interest in the region. So this idea that Jews here are being used as a tool in Western power in the region, but then you have the growing or the strong Zionist lobby in the United States, which also affects decision making in the region. And I would refer Ayman back to the lecture that we did, which we have discussed this in more detail.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Khalid. There is another question. Now that the human rights organizations have called Israel as an apartheid state, can this be a way of pushing economic sanctions on Israel and calling them to account in this way?
Yes, that's actually a very good question and a very good point. That we see lots of international organizations are acknowledging Israel as an apartheid state. Today, Harvard School of Law has approved that Israel fits the definition of an apartheid state, and Israel is an apartheid state. This can be used. However, Israel may take in countermeasures, so it does not. We cannot put sanctions on it. You know, in some states in the United States and also some municipalities in the United Kingdom, boycott or divestment or sanction on Israel is not even tolerated. You are not allowed. The state, you cannot. They will not deal with you if you even promote these ideas. And these legislations have been passed in these states to do so. So you might say, let's turn to the Muslim countries. The Muslim countries can definitely put sanctions on Israel and do this. Israel, as I said, is confronting this with this normalization efforts that it's taking. However, this is actually a big achievement for the Palestinian issue, calling Israel as an apartheid state. Israel is resisting this in every single way, but whatever can be pushed, whichever countries will recognize Israel, the more countries that recognize Israel as an apartheid state will mean that we are moving in the right direction. But you see the Western hypocrisy on this issue clearly with the Ukrainian issue. What has been happening in Palestine for 70, 80, 100 years, just over a few days of the Russian invasion into the Ukraine, the whole world is willing to put sanctions and deal with this issue as an occupation. But when it comes to Palestine, and due to the double standards, unfortunately, it does not do so. So with this issue, I think there is a lot that can be done, and a lot can be built on based on this particular idea of Israel being an apartheid state. This happened in South Africa, and the idea of boycotting goods from South Africa because of its apartheid regime eventually toppled this racist regime that was in South Africa. But this needs mass popular action, because the governments, many of the governments, are complicit in this regard. So the only way forward is actually through the people and the masses, and through educating them to be boycotting. The month of Ramadan is coming up, and a lot of Israeli dates are in the market. So this is something to be aware of, and the idea of boycotting Israeli goods and divestment and sanctions on this apartheid state is an essential milestone for the future of Palestine.
Thank you, Dr. Khalid. I feel like that question answered a couple of questions that came later as well regarding next steps that we should make. There is another question from Hanifa. I find the Zionist claim to be religious really bizarre. How can such a corrupt and inhuman system in all its forms be religious? Is this a type of religious fanaticism, or do you believe them to be completely secular in essence?
Okay, we've partly answered this question as well, that actually the Zionists, starting from Theodor Herzl and through many of the Zionist leadership, including Ben-Gurion, most of them are actually secular and not religious. And this is where we need to differentiate between Judaism or Jews as a religion and Jews as an ethnicity. Jews who are Zionist in this regard are pushing this idea forward. Religious Jews came quite late into the idea of Zionism, but generally it is a secular movement based on the idea of nation state. This is why Theodor Herzl was willing to accept the establishment of a Jewish state wherever it may be, in Uganda, in Africa, in South America, wherever it is. However, in order to mobilize all the Jews around the world, it had to be Palestine because that has this heritage connecting them to this land through one way or another. So most Zionists in that sense, or not most, the largest group of Zionists are actually secular. However, you have the religious and ultra-religious Zionists who are also pushing this idea, and the current people who are pushing for the destruction of al-Masjid al-Aqsa are not the secular Zionists, but are the religious ones and part of the religious Zionists. However, the idea of the destruction of al-Masjid al-Aqsa is something that is agreed upon amongst Jews and Zionists at large. David Ben-Gurion used to say there is no meaning to Israel without Jerusalem, and there is no meaning to Jerusalem without the temple, a secular saying this. And the current reformist Jews who are pushing the idea of the destruction of al-Masjid al-Aqsa are pushing it from a religious point of view. So you have both of them actually have merged and joined forces on this issue. However, the secularists are not that adamant on the idea of the destruction. Most of the religious Jews are saying that God will construct it. However, now this very dangerous group amongst Jews and Zionists who say we need to destroy al-Aqsa and build the temple ourselves for the Masih to come back. So it's a mixture of everything, religious and actually secular Zionists have managed to use religion very well in order to gather the Jews from all over the world to come to Palestine.
Yes, Jazakallah khair for answering that question. There's a question about a petition that would, is there any way we can possibly petition the Muslim leaders to take a stand against dealing with Israel and rise up to support the Palestinian people?
I think it depends on what country we are talking about. Who's asking the question?
Abdullah.
Abdullah, where does she say where she's from? So I can answer the question. If she would say, Abdullah, if you would tell us where you're from, so I can tailor the question to you. But let me share with you some inside information about the normalization of relations with Israel. This started with Donald Trump by blackmailing Arab leaders to normalize relationship with Israel. For them, for example, MBS, for him to have legitimacy, needed the support because he had the coup against Mohammed bin Nayef. He needed the support of the United States. And one of the conditions is that you need to have normal relations with Israel and you need to do 1, 2, 3, 4. He went along with many of these steps. However, in a country like Saudi today, the majority of the people are still anti-Israel and anti-Zionist. And this, if he would announce such normalization, it would be his end. However, through soft power, through the media, and through various different outlets, even films and cinema and other things, they are trying to present the Israeli point of view. And they are trying to present the Palestinians as the, in a negative sense. So for something in a place like Saudi Arabia, there's no way you can petition the government to take a different stance on this issue. And those who tried are currently in prison, and many of them have even died in prison. Looking at other countries like other Gulf states, they're also on the same boat. You cannot criticize the governments for whatever they do. These states are run by families. So there is no way you are able to influence their decision on this issue, because they're allied with the Western Bloc. They see themselves, and Donald Trump made it very clear. He said, you know, I called the king and I said, you have to pay. If we don't support you, we'll fall within 2 weeks, then 2 days, and then 2 hours. This is how they put pressure on these states. Other states like Morocco, which has a parliament, which has a king also at the same time, decided that it wants to normalize with Israel because America said it would recognize the Western Sahara to be part of Morocco. So in return for this, they are willing to normalize relationship with Israel. And they did that. Sudan, to be lifted off the terrorist list, Donald Trump made it clear to them, if you normalize with Israel, we would take you off the terror list, and they did. So you can see how each one of these countries was pushed in, although the people do not want to normalize relations with Israel. However, they don't have a democratic system for you to be able to change this. The government that did the normalizing with Israel in the last elections in Morocco had a complete failure and lost in a landslide against their opposition. So did Abdullah say where she's from?
Yeah, she's in Australia currently.
Yes. There's more you can do actually in Western countries than you can do in Muslim countries in terms of lobbying and petitioning and doing such things, and the government has to respond to it. Whether they do or not is another issue, but the idea of petitioning in Australia, in the UK, in the United States, and across Europe is something through meeting with your member of parliament, through putting pressure on them on this issue. There is a lot that can be achieved in the Western countries more than you can do in Muslim countries. But let's look at other Muslim countries like Pakistan, Indonesia, Malaysia. Malaysia has a very strong stance against normalizing with Israel, although a lot of pressure has been put against Malaysia. The other country, which is the biggest Muslim country, Indonesia. Indonesia had a lot of pressure placed on it through Donald Trump. However, the current pressure on Indonesia to normalize relationship with Israel is much more from the government of Joe Biden than it was during the time of Donald Trump. The American administration puts a lot of pressure on Muslim countries to normalize with Israel and promises them of great benefits and so on and so forth, which they will never see. Recently, you saw Turkey and the president of Turkey welcoming the president of Israel here, and the public are not happy with this, and they protested, and they made all NGOs made nearly statements against this visit. However, what was the reason behind signing this? Coming days will let us know. So it depends on where you are and how you are able to influence and pressure the government. And sometimes it's easier to pressure non-Muslim governments than Muslim governments on some of these issues and reach something. So wherever you are, find out a mechanism that you are able to influence and lobby and change the government position on this. However, with most of the Arab countries that I've mentioned, yesterday I was at an international event, and the example of Salah ad-Din. Salah ad-Din had to fight against Muslim leaders. He tried to win them politically. If they did not come on board, Salah ad-Din fought more against the corrupt Muslim leaders than he did against the Crusades. And learning from history, most of these leaders today in the Muslim countries, their people do not want them, and they are there by force and by the support of Western powers. And the Arab Spring that started was the end of these tyrants. However, the West, unfortunately, which talks about democracy, in the case of Egypt, you know what happened in the other countries and how things turned out, how the Arab Spring was rediverted for the benefit of the West and particularly Israel.
Thank you, Dr. Khalid, for answering that question. There's a question that came through the direct message about the BDS movement. And if the recent international human rights organization attesting that Israel is an apartheid state, plus the recent blatant world uproar on the gross double standards with Ukraine will help to derail the Israel agenda. How can we leverage on these recent developments to help Al-Aqsa?
Yes, I think the first step is to expose the real face of this Zionist state and the real face of the West, how double standards and how hypocrisy is so apparent. And I think in this regard, the international organizations recognizing Israel as an apartheid state, together with the war on the Ukraine and the hypocrisy, and you saw in the media the coverage, the racist coverage and how Europe opened its borders when it had closed it in front of the Afghans and the Syrians, and many of them froze to death just a few weeks ago on the borders of Poland. This is definitely would help the Palestinian issue in making clear how the West is the hypocrisy and the double standards of the West, together with exposing the occupation of this Zionist state and how the world stood even with Ukraine and supported Ukraine. It should give the green light to the Muslim countries to be able to, at least if the Western countries will not support, but at least Muslim countries should take this as an example that if the West is supporting Ukraine in its fight against Russia, then they have legitimate action to support the Palestinians with every means to stand against the occupation. It is a natural right of the person occupied to resist the occupation. And this needs to be supported nationally where you are and also internationally.
Yes. There is a question from Amr Shah. We kind of brushed through some of the things that he mentioned regarding the potential steps and meetings between Turkey and the Zionists. Would you like to add something else or live?
Is he asking something specific about the...
Alaikum.
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
Jazakallah khair for the very informative course. Enjoyed all the classes every other week, and I'm actually a psychiatrist based here in Ohio in the U.S. and so I was asking on behalf of when we do group therapy, we have a big refugee population, mostly from Bayt Hanin over here, and so sometimes they have a Bayt Hanin social club, And within that group therapy, there are always people who ask, what the most practical next steps are, and I know you've reviewed them quite often throughout the course, so really appreciate that. And I think as you mentioned, in the coming weeks, well, I guess we'll find out what these meetings are all about. So, inshallah. So I just want to say Jazakallah khair.
Thank you for attending all the classes and for your engagement. And I think for the next steps, everyone needs to put a roadmap for himself for the liberation of al-Masjid al-Aqsa. And this roadmap needs to be tailored to himself and to the environment that he is living in. And there is a lot all of us can do individually and collectively to free Al-Aqsa Mosque. Al-Aqsa Mosque has been under occupation for way too long. And you see, this is not just related to, it's not just, as we have repeated from the beginning, a Palestinian issue. This is not just an Arab issue. This is not even just a Muslim issue. This is an issue for the whole of humanity. If there is peace in Bayt al-Maqdis, there will be peace across the world. And in the slides, I didn't get to the equation for peace and in the land during the Palestinian-Israeli peace process was peace for land or peace for security. The only way you can achieve peace is through justice, and you're dealing with individuals, refugees who have seen this firsthand, and the trauma this creates in people's minds. It's something that actually lives on, not just in a short period. It continues for a very long period, and it's very traumatizing for the people. And the first step to bring justice to this land is to end the occupation. This is according to international norms. This land, including Al-Aqsa Mosque, is under occupation according to international law. And the whole of Palestine is not recognized under occupation. However, this is a starting point in terms of working with the international community on this. However, the idea of reversing that this is a Palestinian issue, a national Palestinian issue, reversing this back to be a Muslim and a human issue would do us a lot of good. If the Kaaba was under direct American occupation, the Muslims will not stay silent and say, we will only make dua, there's not much in our hands. People will take action, and there is no difference between Al-Aqsa and the Kaaba, as we have seen over the last few weeks. They're like twins in terms of the religious significance and importance. And for this, the other point that I would like to make, that Palestinians are actually not a race. There is no Palestinian race per se. Palestinians are Palestinian Muslims, represent nearly every Muslim ethnicity across the world. My city, Al-Khalil, where I come from, a third of it is Kurdish, part of it is Arab, part of it is Turkish. Next to Al-Masjid al-Aqsa, you have the Afghani Zawiya, you have an Indian Zawiya, you have the North African Quarter, you had people coming, the African Quarter next to Al-Aqsa Mosque. And I will mention something just to, when we last visited, we were walking towards the Masjid al-Aqsa, and behind us there were a black family. And they were speaking Palestinian, and I know there are Black Palestinians. So my wife looked at them, and she looked back at me. She looked back. They're speaking with a Palestinian accent. And then she said to me, "Are they Palestinian?" I said, "Yes. Palestinians are actually, in terms of Muslim, it is like this. If you look at the Christian Palestinians, you have the Armenians, you have the Greek Orthodox, you have the Russian Orthodox. You have also representation. This, as the Quran says, this land is lil alameen. It is for all beings." And as we have quoted Karen Armstrong, the only time that everyone lived in peace and prosperity was under Muslim sovereignty. Only the Muslims, the Christians, and the Jews have exclusive visions for this city. The only ones that have an inclusive vision are the Muslims. So turning this back to what we should do, we talked about each one's 5 steps to do daily, from learning more to making dua, to following the political situation, to boycott, to preparing your gift. Now we are completing this course. Now you need to take this on each level to the next step. When we talk about just observing and following the political, what is happening politically on the ground, now you need to turn this into action. You need to, what some of you have mentioned, lobbying and sharing and educating others on the on this issue. This issue can be fought on numerous fronts, from human rights perspective, from international law, from a human point of view, from an Islamic point of view. But here, those who would liberate Masjid al-Aqsa, to me, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, ibadan lana. They are servants of Allah. They are believers in Allah. So I'm putting my cards and my bet on the Muslim nations that they are the ones that will eventually wake up and be able to liberate al-Masjid al-Aqsa. But in order to reach this, the responsibility now is on your shoulders to educate the Muslims on this issue. This is not for the Palestinians. Recently, I was interviewed for a Turkish magazine, and there's still people say that the Palestinians sold their land, repeating the Zionist propaganda. Actually, the Zionists started with the first propaganda is that there is no one living in this land. And then when they came to this land, they found it full of people. Then they said, the Palestinians sold us their land. And we talked about it in our last class of how 80% of Palestine in 1948 was taken at gunpoint. And the rest of the 20% was taken also at gunpoint in 1967. The idea, so what I said to the magazine, actually the Muslims use this. One, you're repeating Zionist propaganda. Two, it is you're getting out this guilt. Your conscience has guilt that I'm not doing anything, so let me put the blame on the Palestinians. If the Palestinians, all the Palestinians are traitors, and if all the Palestinians sold their land, it does not leave us with saying, I cannot do anything. They have not sold their land. Some of them are offered enormous amount of money for a small shop next to al-Masjid al-Aqsa, open checks, hundreds of millions of dollars, and they do not sell and they do not leave. And they keep fighting and they keep resisting. So the least we can do is stand behind them, support them, and try to take whatever we are able to take action in terms of doing something that will bring an end to this occupation. Wherever we are, in a peaceful manner, try to achieve this until the day comes when we see Al-Aqsa free from occupation, inshallah. So each one draw your roadmap based on the points that we have said, see how you can develop this within the context that you are living, and how you can take it further within lobbying circles, or within petitioning, or within boycott, or within these realms that you are able to push these ideas forward, inshallah. Thank you for the question, and I know I elaborate a bit too much, but as it's the last class, I wish to leave you with everything I know, so all of you will be able to be ambassadors for Masjid al-Aqsa wherever you are. And if you are able to continue your studies in this, or continue taking it to academically on the next step, then that would be great. Back to you, Anna.
Inshallah. There is a question, I think we answered this question regarding why Muslim countries are making ties with Israel. We said every country gains something from this normalization. So,
yes. And the blackmailing they get from the United States.
Yes. Muhammad is asking that he's a medical student and he wants to help and be involved medically in the future, if there is any way that he can help in that way.
Actually, this is a good point. Each one of you can actually support within their own field, and you need to think of innovative ways in which you are able to do this. An engineer, a doctor, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a historian, whatever field in IT, whatever field you are in, see how you can make your field serve the issue of al-Masjid al-Aqsa. In terms of medically, you saw in the last wars in Gaza, many European doctors would go and help during times of crisis, and put their expertise, and particularly a Swedish doctor used to travel every time there is a war. He would take leave from his job and go and help in this regard. There are Doctors Without Borders who have taken many doctors into Palestine to support and help. There is Medical Aid for Palestine. There is many different, as I mentioned, whichever area you want to look at, you will find a way. And even Brother Amir mentioned, even he's working with refugees from Bayt Hanina in this regard. So each one, see how you can, within the field of your expertise, serve Al-Aqsa and serve Bayt al-Maqdis in this regard.
Jazakallah khair, Dr. Khalid. That's really good to think of. Yeah, in every field, that's really now I'm starting to think, what shall I do next?
Yeah. Thank you. You did a great job in organizing this. We actually, this course actually started first at the University of Birmingham with Amna and her team. And then, alhamdulillah, this went worldwide, from the United States to South Africa to Malaysia and Indonesia. Everyone's joining from different parts of the world. You started this. May Allah bless you for what you have done. But think, yes, how you can, within your own field, you can serve Bayt al-Maqdis and Al-Aqsa.
Yes, alhamdulillah. MashaAllah. Thanks to everyone, of course, who was a big part of this project. And thanks to you, first of all, for hosting these lectures. We have a question by Ibn Taymiyyah. He was asking about, some Muslims are looking at these crises as a family issue, because he talks with his friends and they're trying to convince him that it's Prophet Ibrahim's family crisis and it can be solved by dialogue and understanding.
Yes. You would really wish, it's not, it depends what you mean by family issue. The family of Ibrahim goes beyond just the children of Ismail and the children of Ishaq. It goes to cover the whole world. So it's anyone who believes in Ibrahim alayhi salam, which is more than half the world's population, this is an issue that is related to them, not just to the Arabs and the Jews. It's not an Arab-Israeli issue. And for years, dialogue and discussion have been going on, and it can be resolved if there's a just sovereignty. Then everything can be resolved through dialogue and understanding, and it has been like that from the time of Umar ibn Khattab. When Umar ibn Khattab established his Umar assurance of safety, he gave protection to the churches, to their belongings. Everything is under the protection of Islam, but you need to have a sovereign that believes in this inclusive vision. The current Zionist state is exclusive, like the Crusades were exclusive. And the only way, before we get to that stage, the brother who's asking the question, before we get to that stage, first you need to end the occupation, and then you can have mutual understanding. And I recommend that you read the book called Introducing Islamic Jerusalem. Introducing Islamic Jerusalem is available in the Islamic Jerusalem e-library. Actually, it talks about the ideas that you are mentioning, the idea of mutual respect, living in peace and harmony. What is the Islamic principles for this? And how Islam achieved this for 1300 years. So this book, Introducing Islamic Jerusalem, has a section for conflict resolution, a section for multiculturalism. Bayt al-Maqdis, Islamic Jerusalem, was a model for multiculturalism. It was, and if we manage to resolve it in Bayt al-Maqdis, you can resolve it across the whole world. This is the hotbed. If you manage to resolve it there, you'll be able to resolve it across the whole world, inshallah.
Inshallah. There is a question about the different political parties receiving financial support by Zionist states. Is one of the reasons that they support the agenda of Zionism. What is your opinion about this support?
Which parties? Which political parties?
It was a bit general in a way.
Okay. Who's asking the question?
Ayman.
Okay. If Ayman, if you would kindly explain which political parties you exactly mean, because we can answer this in so many different contexts. So if you ask specifically, if you're asking about it, that would be better.
Okay. Hanifa is asking regarding the UK, the support that we can do locally and internationally, possibly. I think she's based in Bradford. He's based in Bradford, and setting an exhibition there, and will it set up nationally?
Who's this? Sorry.
Hanifa.
Hanifa. So what she's asking?
So in order to help liberate, we must first appreciate the significance of the struggles, and this course has enabled us to do so. In which ways you can help support us in spreading this knowledge on local level? Would I-Level Aqsa be one way?
Yes.
And they've heard about an exhibition in Bradford. Will this be set up nationally or internationally?
Yes. Yes, the project of I-Level Aqsa is part of the bigger project of Bayt al-Maqdis international project. And the idea of I-Level Aqsa, it is to translate the concepts that we have been discussing at sometimes deep levels and sometimes at simple levels, to translate this scholarship into simple language that will be accessible to all the Muslims across the world in their different languages. So the I-Level Aqsa campaign, which will be launched inshallah this Ramadan, is looking at reaching all the Muslims with the knowledge on Masjid al-Aqsa, the knowledge that they need to know in a simplified form in terms of animations, short videos, leaflets, quizzes, and so on. So it's an international project, currently in 12 or 13 languages, in English, Arabic, Turkish, Urdu, in Albanian, Bosnian, Indonesian, Malaysian, so many languages. So if any of you here who have attended knows of any other languages that should be included, please do get in touch with the I Love Al-Aqsa team, and they would work on that, inshallah azza wa jal. The idea of also I Love Al-Aqsa is to set up an exhibition in most of the museum exhibition on Al-Aqsa across the main capitals and the main cities around the world. The first one of them is already in the finishing stages in Bradford in the UK. The second, inshallah, will be in Ankara, hopefully also in Jakarta, in other Muslim capitals. So if any of you also here is interested, also please do get in touch with the I Love Al-Aqsa team through their Instagram or through their the website, and see how we can develop a strategy for the countries that you are in to spread knowledge on Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. So the idea is the Bayt al-Maqdis Islamic Jerusalem project starts with numerous different levels. The first level is to create scholarship through a PhD and postgraduate research. It is to research a topic well and to present it within the Muslim understanding. The second level is these courses, and one of them is this course, Step by Step to Bayt al-Maqdis. It's been done for the last 8 years actually in Turkey, in Turkish. And here, as this is our final class, I would like to extend also thanks to Ramza, who attended the course in Turkish and then took it to the University of Birmingham, and with Anna and the rest of the team started there. And then this is continuing. You can see the international fold that this issue would take forth. The third level is to spread this to the general public and even children. And within this, actually, a curriculum has been designed for children in Arabic, and it's currently being developed in English and in Turkish. The curriculum is to give the basis of our relationship with Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa to children and to the public and to academics and to everyone. It is to create the Islamic narrative, because until recently, the narrative out there is the Zionist and the biblical narrative, or the Orientalist narrative. And the Muslim narrative has been very weak. So now it is a responsibility on your shoulders to take this knowledge that you have developed and to spread it in the circles around you, and to try to take this to the next step. So back to Hanifa, yes, if you get in touch with the team, the I Love Al-Aqsa team in Bradford, and see also how you can help them, and see how it can be spread in the UK and also internationally, inshallah.
Yes, inshallah. That's the exhibition idea is really brilliant. We hope we can all attend, inshallah.
It will be a permanent exhibition. It will be like a mini museum to give information to those coming in, so they see the importance of Al-Aqsa. They see a 3D representation of the Masjid Al-Aqsa. Also, they will see the interactive screens. They can buy products from Palestine. They can buy merchandise. So it's a mini museum. This is besides a mobile exhibition, which is on a double-decker bus. The bus has also been bought, and the idea is to travel with this bus across cities in the UK and even beyond that, inshallah.
MashaAllah. That sounds really nice. Yes, Ayman replied about the political parties. It's
Yes.
in the US.
Yes.
So,
Can you remind me of the question again? So he was talking about funding that the political parties get.
Yes, how the financial support by Zionists supports one of the, like if the political parties have financial support by the Zionists.
Yes, actually in the United States, you would know better, lobbying groups like AIPAC actually do a lot of work on lobbying politically, and they have very strong financial support. But I'm not sure exactly how these political parties, what type of funding they receive, and the amount of funding they do receive. But I'm aware that there are such things, but the amounts and which parties, I am not exactly sure. So I would need to research it, or you can research this and see what you can find on this, and maybe share it with the rest of the group, inshallah.
Inshallah. Abu Maimouna mentioned that the Friends of Al-Aqsa is one of the organizations in the UK that people can support as well.
Yes, actually, yes. Thank you, Abu Maimouna. The Friends of Al-Aqsa is not a charity, but it's a political lobbying group, and the work Brother Ismail Patel does and has been doing for a long time, pushing in terms of political lobbying and putting pressure on different parties and groups. And even last Ramadan, on the 28th of Ramadan, the demonstrations that were led, Friends of Al-Aqsa in the UK played a very big role in pushing some of this forward. Let's not be taken by surprise this coming Ramadan. Let's plan from now. Each one where you are, what would you do? The problem is we're always reactive. We need to get out of being reactive into being proactive on some of these issues, because being reactive really limits your options. Will we do a demonstration? Will we do this? The idea of being proactive and putting new ideas on the table that can change the scene and make sure that it can develop ideas for the future and for the liberation, mainly on the knowledge front. If Muslims are not aware of the importance of the Masjid al-Aqsa, then they will not be able to, they will just go out on a demonstration. They feel, you saw some of the nonsense that took place, and that put Friends of Al-Aqsa and other organizations in a very difficult position, shouting racist remarks and various different things. This does not benefit. This actually deters people from working on this front. So you need to be wise, you need to be clever, and you need to think of where you are and how best to get out there the issue of the Masjid al-Aqsa to Muslims, and the issue of Palestine even to the wider public.
Jazakallah khair, Dr. Khalid. Just one last question. I think it was answered in the chat by Ramzi. Abdullah was asking about the children's program.
Yes.
And Ramzi sent a link for that. So
yes.
I think that should...
We mentioned Aqsa for Kids. So if people can look through that, inshallah, they would find both the curriculum and also a lot of very nice, you can show it to your kids or to your brothers and sisters, some very nice videos that have been developed for children. I sit and sing them with my children, so you can enjoy the Aqsa for Kids, and it also is educational for adults.
Yeah, it's really nice. Do they have books by any chance that I can share with?
Yes, the books are on their Instagram link. The book, there are 2 series of books in Arabic, and they're currently being translated into English and into Turkish. Some of the videos are also in English, so half of the content is in English and half of it is in Arabic. So you can benefit from it, and people around you can benefit from this also, inshallah.
Inshallah. There was a question that I don't know if it was answered or not by Nafisa. She was saying that she visited Al-Aqsa before, but she was wondering about nowadays.
Yes, it is possible. They've reopened if you have a British passport or European passport, or even from South Africa or from Turkey, it is possible to go and visit. There's lots of restrictions because of Corona. You have to go on a portal before you travel, and you need to fill in all your information. You need to do a PCR test before you travel, and then you will do one once you arrive. So the idea of getting there, if you have a Western passport, it is now they've reopened this. If there's no more questions, can I wrap up with the future part?
Yes.
Or are we out of time?
If it will be short, I think that should be fine for everyone.
Okay. The future part, I want to concentrate just very briefly on the Israeli studies on the future. There are many studies done by Israeli professors there is a field called future studies, and people like David Pasig and others have talked about the future of Israel from political science and within the future studies context. And what is really interesting is that all of them see a gloomy future for the state of Israel. They are talking about, even during the last attack on Al-Aqsa and then the last war, even talking about the demography, that by 2050, Israel will have a population of 16 million Jews, and by 2100, maybe 30 to 35 million. But the problem is that the Palestinian population actually grows much more, and this is problematic in various fronts. They talk about that some of them, even Israeli politicians, that Israel is a state that would not survive more than 10 years. This was mentioned by Shimon Peres, and it was mentioned by even an ex-American president on this regard. But the person that I'm mentioning, he wrote a book called 2048, and he talks about the demography, the technology, and the inevitable future trends for Israel. The problem that they see within these studies is that what united the Israelis or the Jews in 1948 over the idea of nation state no longer exists. And they talk about deconstruction, the genealogy, distance, alternative pasts and futures, and reordering knowledge and various different concepts within this. At the end, from a security point of view, although they talk about Iran as being a threat, actually most of the think tanks in Israel see Turkey currently as a threat, as a strategic threat to Israel. A study done by the Institute for National Security Studies, INSS, talks about some of these issues, that South Lebanon, Iran, the Palestinians, Hamas, and one of the most dangerous things that Israel tries to resist is the alienation of Israel. This is why Israel is against boycott, divestment, and sanctions, because it would put Israel in a very difficult position that Israel will not be able to progress. And this is how Israel is confronting this, with the idea of pushing normalization. Otherwise, it is their end. Many of the studies do not see a future of Israel beyond 2050. These are Israeli studies. I'm not talking about Muslim or Islamic scholars. Most of them see that things are on the downfall for the state of Israel politically. Even European studies give similar perspectives. Also, studies done by the CIA and others, the stability in the region and the issue with Israel and how to resolve many of these issues. All of this is possibilities. The possibilities that are being pushed in this regard is that within the bigger picture, Israel as a foreign entity in the heart of the Muslim world would not survive. Now, looking at it from another two perspectives, the first one is the historical perspective. Israel is very similar to the Crusades. The Crusades lasted for 88 years and eventually they left back to where they came from in Europe. Israel as a foreign entity actually has a lot of similarities with the Crusades. And I shared with you a paper that I wrote on this, and some references there make comparisons between the Crusades and the Zionist state in this regard. So it is inevitable from a historical point of view that Israel will also come to an end gradually, like the Crusader period, who were squeezed on the coastal line eventually, and eventually left the whole region all completely. Now, from a Christian point of view, actually read on Christian Zionist literature, they are talking about a worse Holocaust of the Jews than the Holocaust of Hitler. This is Christian Zionist literature. They are talking about Armageddon, about a war that will destroy World War III, that will destroy the whole region, the coming of the Messiah, the rebuilding of a Jewish temple over the site of the Masjid al-Aqsa, and they are raising funds for this. They are proactively working. Watch their TV channels, watch their literature. It is shocking. The last point that I would like to talk about, which is the Islamic perspective. I gave you everything else and I left the Islamic perspective to the end. The Islamic perspective talks about the gathering of the Jews in the land of Palestine at the end of Surah Al-Isra in verse 103, that when the second promise that Allah gave to them, they shall be gathered in the land of Bayt al-Maqdis, and this will be their end. The first step for their demise will be the exposure of the real faces, their true colors. Allah is even in these verses addressing the Jews in these verses. First, your faces shall be disgraced, and then they shall enter the mosque the same way they entered it the first time. So it talks about it that the liberation of al-Masjid al-Aqsa is inevitable. After the liberation of al-Masjid al-Aqsa, the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ talk about that Bayt al-Maqdis will be the final center of the Khilafah of the Muslims. So Khilafah will come back to Bayt al-Maqdis, and it will be the last center of the Khilafah, that it will be the last capital of the Muslims. This is from the hadith, the Sahih hadith on this. The other point of view is that after the Khilafah is established, then as Imam Suyuti says, after 40 Khalif, then the Mahdi will come, then Isa alayhi salam will come and kill the biggest fitna in the world, which is Dajjal. So the destruction, remember when we talked about the idea of the Holy Land, al-Ardul Muqaddasa, that on this land, no tyrant will ever last. And the current, in terms of world history, the current Zionist state, 74 years old, is not long in terms of world history. We discussed tens of thousands of years of history. This is number one. The second is that after justice is established and peace is established on the whole of the earth, maybe centuries later, Ya'juj and Ma'juj will come, and they shall be destroyed also in Bayt al-Maqdis before the start of the Day of Judgment. So there are still many episodes before the Day of Judgment, and one of the first episodes that can be understood from the Quran is the liberation of al-Masjid al-Aqsa. The liberation of al-Masjid al-Aqsa is inevitable. When will it happen depends on you and me. Inna Allah la yughayyiru ma biqawm. Allah will not change your circumstances until you change it yourself. This is the law of Allah, which we cannot escape. We cannot wait for the liberation of al-Masjid al-Aqsa. The liberation of al-Masjid al-Aqsa first needs to, from the roadmap of the Prophet, knowledge, and the roadmap of Salah, knowledge, then you move to the other steps afterwards. But knowledge is the most important one. I'd like to thank you for your engagement and for attending and for engaging in these classes. And on your behalf, I would like to thank the organizers, all the different organizers from South Africa, Palestine Information Network, to the organizations in the UK, the Malaysian Society, to the Arts and History, and all the organizations who, to I Love Al-Aqsa, and to the Islamic Jerusalem, the Studies Project, and to the university, which will be issuing your certificates. I think there are some homeworks that you have been asked to do. Once they are completed, hopefully, based on the attendance, the certificate will be issued from the university and be passed on to you in digital format, or if you do come and visit Turkey, you can pick it up from Ankara directly. But please, everyone, think of how you can develop things within your community, within your environment, and take the knowledge that you have learned and use it for a roadmap that you will develop for yourselves for the liberation of al-Masjid al-Aqsa. I really enjoyed this first course, organized 10-week course on Bayt al-Maqdis, step-by-step to Bayt al-Maqdis. And your questions have always been intriguing and engaging. Barakallah feekum, and back to you, Amna.
Yes, Jazakallah khair, Dr. Khalid. It was really eye-opening, this lecture course. Really changed so many perspectives that we didn't know, and yeah. And thank you to everyone who attended those lectures, and make sure to submit your summaries so you can get the certificate, inshallah. And we hope you can show what you've learned in your local community, as Dr. Khalid said, in any way possible, and let that be your gift for Al-Aqsa, inshallah. Yeah, Jazakumullah khair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I hope, inshallah, this was recorded. It could be uploaded later.
Yeah, inshallah.
Thank you very much, and Jazakumullah khair al-jazaa for your patience. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.